Phew, I'm Bill Radke. Welcome to KUOW's Week in Review. We'll discuss tempori and layoffs and Kraken variants and Alzheimer's drugs and a murder case and somehow even a reason to smile with my journalist panel here on Week in Review. My panel today, Seattle Times health reporter Elise Takahama. Welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, Bill.
We have Puget Sound Business Journal tech reporter Alex Halverson. Hi, Alex.
Hey, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Welcome back. And health journalist Joanne Silberner. Welcome back, too. Nice to see you.
Great to be here.
And I mean see you because you can watch the show if you like, because we're on Facebook and YouTube. You just search KUOW Public Radio, and you can watch the program. Okay, let's get at what's been happening this week. A Washington State University doctoral student made his first appearance in court this week as the suspect in the murder of 4 students at the University of Idaho in Moscow, just 10 miles from Bryan Kohlberger's home in Pullman. We all have a lot of questions. Elise, you have a bunch of questions about this case.
Yeah, this case is one that is, obviously really sad and really horrific. And so I believe the suspect made his first appearance in court yesterday. So it's still pretty early in the court's process. But yeah, the big things that we still don't know at this point are, number one, why did it take so long for police to be alerted after the killings? I had seen reports, I believe, that police weren't notified until hours later for some reason, although it's still unclear why. If the suspect knew any of the victims, and then a big one would be motive or lack of motive as well. And all 3 of those, are of course things that often take time to investigate, but even still, because of just the horrific nature of this case, I think it's still tough to not have some of those big questions answered.
Yes, Joanne, you're nodding your head through it all.
Yeah, and I think I also read that the local police put a lockdown on information. They said, we're not talking to the media. And I don't know whether that's because, this is a little town. This is, as you said, a really traumatic and awful experience, and they just want to keep things okay in the town, or whether it has something to do with the investigation. There's just so many mysteries here. And the coverage, the reporters aren't saying there's no motive yet, or there's been no motive identified yet. And I wish they would just say that, because I keep reading these stories where actually probably wouldn't. There are so many other things going on in the world today, and there's kind of nothing I can do about what's happening there. So I wouldn't necessarily spend time on it, but I keep reading. So where's the motive? Where's the motive?
Mm-hmm. And Alex, you were also talked about the media frenzy in this.
Yeah, obviously there's the TikTok aspect of it. I don't know if anybody saw, but there were TikTok true crime people who thought they were going to solve it, and they were accusing people who work nearby, I think at the university. So it created really this big media frenzy in what's a pretty small community. University of Idaho isn't in a big town. Pullman's not very big. And now you've got journalists parachuting in. Obviously, they should be covering it. This is a big story. But now that he has been apprehended, the suspect, hopefully there's a little time for newsrooms to sort of take a breath and figure out how to cover this responsibly, I think.
Mm-hmm. What I've noticed is the role of the lack of privacy, for better or worse.
Absolutely.
This has been about DNA databases and surveillance footage and cell phone data. So if you're glad a suspected killer has been caught, you're kind of also glad about the increase in snooping in my lifetime.
Well, there's some of the DNA came from the garbage of his father.
Yes. Yeah, they use these public databases are catching killers. Suspected, by the way. This is alleged. This person is not anywhere close to convicted, obviously.
Yeah, I remember I used to cover cops in courts for the Seattle PI a few years ago, and there was a cold case in Bothell. And the suspect, after years, was caught because they suspected it was him through genealogy, and they got his DNA off a coffee cup in a casino. So it's very public places. They're getting this DNA, this evidence. And obviously, if it goes toward justice, it's a good thing. But like you said, there's kind of the looming prospect of more surveillance, more DNA, more invasion of privacy in it as well.
And of course,
that misinformation.
DNA, I'm sorry I'll just to finish my thought, at least, is that sometimes DNA exonerates people who have been wrongly accused as well. Yes, Elise.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry to interrupt. I think, what Alex, you had mentioned about the misinformation piece, though, really reminded me of even, a couple months ago when we were talking about Seattle serial killer and having all of these, misinformation posts run rampant on social media because of that.
Right.
And, I think that we were able to shut that down pretty quickly. But even still, it's, cases like these where, we just have to be really careful about what we're consuming media wise.
Well, we there's a lot more we're going to know. So speaking of media caution, let's pause there. And this suspect is going to have another court appearance next week. And so this is, by the way, someone studying criminal justice at Washington State University, studying criminology. Anyway, more to say later, but we're going to take a quick break on Week in Review, and we're going to go to not one, but two capitals when we return and continue with what happened this week and why it matters. Stay tuned.
.949 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:13. 48 degrees in Seattle. We expect rain today and a high of 52.
How can 265,000 cattle go missing? Only one way. They never existed in the first place. Ghost Herd is the new podcast produced by KUOW and Northwest Public Broadcasting. It's about Cody Easterday, the man at the center of one of the largest cattle swindles in history. Ghost Herd is a story about family and fraud and the shift of power in rural America. Start listening January 10th by searching for Ghost Herd wherever you get your podcasts.
Support for KUOW comes from Amazon, partnering with Seattle and Bellevue Public Schools to provide direct funding for urgent needs like food, clothing, and school supplies for students and families in need through its Right Now Needs Fund.
This is KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke with health journalists Joanne Silberner and Elise Takahama with the Seattle Times, Elise with the Seattle Times, and Puget Sound Business Journal reporter Alex Halverson.
I hope that when young women now see me in this position, they see they can accomplish anything they set their minds to.
That was Washington's U.S. Senator Patty Murray on becoming president pro tempore of the Senate, which makes her third in line to the presidency after the vice president and the Speaker of the House, which doesn't currently exist. Elise, President Pro Tem is a largely ceremonial job. Do you think this means anything in particular to the residents of Washington State?
That's a good question. Yeah, I do think it is largely ceremonial. So I don't know that Washington in particular will be that affected. And again, it's so temporary. So who is to even say how long this is going to last? But regardless, I think it was kind of a fun moment for Seattleites and Washingtonians to see Senator Murray up there. Yeah, I think from what it sounds like, her appropriations committee chair position is going to be probably a different story, though. From what she said, I mean, she is going into that role with a lot of Washington and Pacific Northwest specific priorities, and because she's basically going to, have full range of what where a lot of the fiscal spending is going to go, then things like wildfire funding and salmon recovery are going to probably be high on her list.
Yes, absolutely. Leading the Senate Appropriations Committee, which I read that this is the first time. That's a very, very powerful committee. And it's just a little footnote is that it's the first time that committee is likely to be held by 4 women from the majority and minority parties in the House and Senate. Again, that's if the House of Representatives ever convenes and starts doing business. And Elise mentioned, people from Washington State watching our senator up there. And Joanne, you and I were talking about how she was literally in her tennis shoes on that day.
And I think she really took the high road in her comments. And, she could have taken the opportunity to say, here I am, third in line for the presidency because, the Republicans are just sort of so disorganized and chaotic. And said she took the high road and said, isn't this a great step for women? Isn't this nice? It also kind of masks over who actually would have been, I think, in other times in that position. And that because Patty Murray's number 2 in terms of seniority in the Senate behind Dianne Feinstein from California. And I'm going to say the way the LA Times put it, there have been, quote, concerns have grown that she may no longer have the stamina and mental sharpness which was a polite way of saying what a lot of people in Washington, D.C. are saying, which is she's not really fully there. She would argue that other people are more concerned, but that's what, so she did not go for this position, and it ended up with Patty Murray, because Patty's actually number 2 in seniority rather than number 1.
Right. Alex, have you been watching all this Capitol drama?
A little bit, yeah. One thing that is striking, and I don't cover, obviously, the Capitol, but, Patty Murray has been a longtime abortion rights, I won't say activist, but she's always stood up for those rights. And at this time, it does feel pretty striking to have her in a leadership position. There's also the fact, I think Elise put this in her pre-show notes, but a couple months ago, we were saying, oh, is this going to be a close race with her and Tiffany Smiley?
Right.
And now she's in this leadership position. So I think kind of those threads are kind of interesting to pull at.
Yeah, I don't even know if the average listener knows the mom in tennis shoes reference anymore. I mean, that was a long time ago. I don't know how she was taken seriously enough to be elected, but anyone who's counted out Patty Murray, this is her 6th term in the U.S. Senate. And we were in between segments on the air. We're of course just chatting away about the TikTok drama, the minute by minute vote counting for the non-Speaker of the House that continues today, at least as of this recording. I think they're on ballot number 12 or something.
Yeah,
I think he just lost his 12th.
Did
is what I read on Twitter. I could be wrong.
Okay. 14. I'm told. There you go.
14.
The bidding keeps. Thank you, Bernard. Or Bernard Willets is heading into vote number 14.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, all this to say that things seem in Washington State. First of all, Senator Murray's ascension to President pro tempore seemed so simple. Seemed so to work so well compared to what's happening among House Republicans. And in Washington State, we've had a House Speaker since November. You don't think there's going to be a rebellion against House Speaker Lori Jenkins of Tacoma, right? Oh, okay. So in Washington, the legislative session begins Monday, and we're going to have lots of coverage beginning next week. But since we have some journalists here, Alex, what's an item that you will be following in the Washington legislature? Again, you're with Puget Sound Business Journal covering tech. What are you watching in Olympia?
Absolutely. There's this one bill that kind of languished in the legislature last year. Basically, it pertains to personnel records at companies, how much access employees have to them. Companies like Amazon have kind of been able to loophole, you can have access to maybe performance reviews, things like this. I've talked to a former Amazon employee, his name's Patrick McGaugh, interviewed him for a piece. He spoke with Business Insider, Bloomberg, and told a story about being allegedly pipped by Amazon.
Yes.
Which is quite the process, but his frustration.
It's kind of like getting squeezed out, right? Performance.
Basically, yeah, it's sounds like torturous process of getting squeezed out through just a mountain of work to, catch up.
Yeah. PIP is what? Performance something.
I don't know the exact acronym. That's just, they just throw it around a lot. Basically placed on a performance improvement plan.
I think it's a performance improvement plan.
Yes. Yeah.
Not good.
And basically, he's been championing this bill because he could never access his performance review records. He didn't know what he really needed to work on. Oh. And this is a kind of a tale you hear from a lot of ex-employees who have been pipped. So basically, this bill would kind of make it so Amazon has to give over these types of records, right? They would classify them as personnel records.
Well, why does Amazon want to keep the record? What's the big deal about being more transparent?
Because then it's easier to pip people, right? You don't have to give as much reason. You can just sort of, again, squeeze them out. They have this attrition rate they have to hit each year according to internal documents. So it just makes it easier if they can sort of obfuscate that.
I see. How about you, Elise? What's an issue that you'll be following in our Washington State legislative session that starts next week?
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure Joanne will probably be looking at this as well, but this is going to be an interesting session on the health side and the hospital side in particular. Last year, one of the main hospital-related debates kind of surrounded the issue of staffing ratios, so nurse-to-patient ratios, or how many nurses are assigned to how many patients. So generally, it's like 2 to 1 is two nurses to 1 patient. And generally, it's ideal to have lower ratios because that means that one patient has more care from the nurses who are around them. So generally, healthcare unions and nurses are very for implementing strict staffing ratios in Washington hospitals, which is something that only California really has done in the US. They're the only ones who've really had comprehensive laws like this that really enforce having to stay by these ratios. And so hospitals generally oppose them in Washington. They think that if we implement these ratios, that they'll eventually have to start turning patients away because they basically won't be able to, still comply with the ratio, or, they'll be fined. So they're coming at it from that perspective. Unions are coming at it from a perspective of just wanting to reduce burnout and reduce basically this attrition that's been going on at hospitals for the past couple of years. And so that bill failed last year. It was also introduced during the session last year, went through the House, but it failed in the Senate. So they're going to be reintroducing that this year. And I think that it might just get to be a really heated debate. I mean, it's a really good question. And I think because only California has really looked into this staffing ratio issue and actually had data come from it, they're the only ones who really have, an accurate sense of how it might play out. So in Washington, we're definitely going to be hoping to hear from a lot of experts on that side. But of course, that's just one issue. I think, the other top ones are, hospitals are wanting to get Medicaid reimbursement rates updated on the state level, and that is up to the legislature. Medicare is up to the federal government, but the Medicaid side gets decided on the state level. So that's something that has been a really big topic for the past couple of months, especially because it's true that these rates haven't been updated for 20 years. So that, and then also looking at long-term care issues, are going to be pretty big on the health side this year. It's a lot of stuff to follow.
And I think the thing to remember from the patient point of view, what we're seeing, if we're in the hospital, and the ratios, I think my understanding of the ratios of nurses to patients is it varies, so that in the ICU, you'll have that 2-to-1 ratio, but
definitely
regular floor, it might be something different. But U.S. News and World Report does its hospital rankings every year. And one of the key ones, the one that I look at, not that I would ever travel to go to a hospital, I'd rather just be treated at my local hospital. But if I did, it'd be the nursing ratios that I would look at. And U.S. News factors that into how highly they rate a hospital. You're not going to get a high rating with a low ratio. And it's because even if there aren't specific studies, it's just clear that better nursing means, and you can only have better nursing when the nurses aren't overwhelmed. I mean, this is sort of, to me, a be nice to nurses bill. We really need to be nice to nurses. We can't, if we overwhelm them, they can't take care of us well. So I think from my point of view as a patient, rather than as a journalist, I want the nurses to get what they want, and I want the hospitals to get what they want in terms of the Medicaid funding, because if they're having to skimp in other places, it's going to affect me.
Well, those are a couple of things to watch in Olympia in our legislative session coming up starting next week. We'll have a lot more to say about that. Since we're talking about hospitals and staffing and patients, I just wanted to note how not overwhelmed our hospitals are in early January.
Oh, do not get excited.
No?
No.
I mean, I've been waiting for the COVID wave.
Yes, and you can continue, and it might come.
Okay.
The one thing that's been true about COVID all along is how really, really unpredictable it is. Mm-hmm. It's just all bets are off. And when you look at, the numbers for flu and for RSV are down, and that's looking good. COVID not looking so, it's not looking so bad right now. But and there's a new variant, which percentage of variance for us, it's only a few percent, but across the country, it went up. If I'm reading the CDC's numbers correctly, from 20% of all variants are this new one to 40%. The new one doesn't cause greater illness, but it does look to be a little more infectious. It's
may I play a quick piece of audio about exactly the subvariant you're talking about, and then I want to continue with you, Joanne. If this is the Omicron subvariant, very infectious, called XBB.1.5, a name that Yahoo News says is not catchy enough.
A new strain of the COVID Omicron variant now accounting for 40% of cases in the U.S., according to the Centers for Disease Control. And prevention scientists have named this subvariant Kraken.
That's right, Brian. And a note, it's not officially called Kraken. It is just the nickname given for now because we ran out or have not been given a Greek letter name for it just yet.
No Greek letter for it, so let's call it the Kraken. Thanks a lot.
This has always been a problem with COVID. You know, when it started out, as we remember, President Trump called it the Wuhan virus or the China virus. It's been an issue with some of the Ebola variants that when you assign it a name from a country, it's disparaging. And so they've been giving these letters, and I guess they're running out of Greek letters.
Yeah, which is too bad because the next Greek letter is pi after Omicron, and I was sort of looking forward to the pumpkin subvariant and the rufus subvariant, but it's not going to happen. There's a hockey team called the Nashville Predators, which would be a better name for a disease, I would think, than the Kraken. But we're stuck with it here in Seattle. So, so you think don't be too relieved about where we are regarding COVID. Okay.
And I just read something on the way over from an immunologist at Johns Hopkins, and he says that early studies of this new variant show it's a little more infectious and less sensitive to vaccinations, but vaccinations still work. He did say there's indications that having had COVID isn't as protective against this one, you know, as it might be. So,
but it's not especially virulent, is it? I mean, no, all COVID is dangerous. I'm running from it, but
yeah, this one is not. It's not the super bug that people have been scared about and worried about, but it is COVID. It as you know, the early studies look like it's a little more infectious and a little less sensitive to, or you know, if you've had COVID before, you're a little less protected against this variant than some of the other ones. So this immunologist at Hopkins was saying this is just another message to, you know, if you haven't been boosted, maybe it's time to think about it.
Yeah. Can I get a little bit of download from you on? I just got a breaking news alert from the New York Times in my inbox, and it says that the FDA has just approved a new treatment for early Alzheimer's, and you were kind of wet blankety on this drug. So what's going on?
Boy, I should first say that my father had Alzheimer's many years ago.
My mother had dementia. I don't know. She didn't get an Alzheimer's diagnosis, but I've been there too. Yeah,
and it's boy, when these new drugs come out, and a couple of them came out when my dad was still alive, and you get hopeful, and I don't want to. And of course, the drugs did nothing for him back then. And will this drug do something for people? Not a whole lot. I mean, the numbers in the initial studies were, there's an 18-point scale for where you add up, you know, you get 3 points if you're fully there in terms of being able to communicate with others, and 3 points if you're fully there in terms of being able to dress yourself and things like that. And so a total of 18 points. This drug made a 0.45 point difference out of 18. Now, what does that mean? It depends on who you talk to. Some say, well, you know, it slows things down for 3 to 4 months, and other physicians who've worked with it say it's not really noticeable in a big way. It is certainly not a cure. Is it going to be help? It's also, by the way, side effects. It's a little easier to take than the original drug that came out, but you get infusion twice a month. You have to go to the hospital probably for that, or a technical place. That's hard on people. This is only for mild to moderate right now, but even my dad had moderate, and boy, taking him around to doctors was tough. I don't want to be a wet blanket, but I'm not encouraged.
Yeah, well, I want to know. I remember there was controversy over this other.
Oh, the other one
drug,
was, yeah.
But it's better than that.
It's better than that, but I hate to say that because I don't want to use the word better in terms, but that one was so bad that the FDA changed, in order to approve that one, it changed its criteria for approval from showing some kind of benefit, or at least a slowing, to showing a change in brain anatomy, to showing less of that gunky stuff that clogs up people's brains. That one was pretty much run out of town by the entire medical community.
Yeah.
Not only, you know, one thing was its cost, and we don't know. The company is supposed to announce within hours what this new drug is going to cost, but the old one, the company initially was charging $58,000, And now it's down to 28,000. But even at that, Medicare said, you know what, we're not convinced that it works. So.
Oh. Okay, and health reporter Elise Takahama, this is new. The FDA just approved this drug. It's a monoclonal antibody known as Leqembi. Are you up on anything about this about Alzheimer's treatment yet?
No, not quite yet. Although, what Joanne is saying is really interesting, and so I would be curious to kind of follow. Is this so? It was just initial FDA approval.
Accelerated approval. So that's
accelerated approval.
Form of approval, but it is a form of approval, and they're going to go for. They said the two companies working on it said they are going to go for the full approval as soon as this one comes through. So.
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't reported on it much myself, but would be really interested to follow how that plays out. That would be, either way. I mean, it would be good to know what that data looks like.
Speaking of the two companies, I know you're on the tech beat at Puget Sound Business Journal. This is not your beat, Alex, but I was when I saw FDA approval Alzheimer's drug. I'm always kind of hoping that this will be one of the Seattle biotech companies, and not so.
No, and I don't cover biotech. Although we do. My colleague Rick Morgan covers a lot of biotech, and they're occupying a lot of office space in downtown Seattle. So I was a little surprised as well. Every time I kind of hear one of these things, I think it's going to be one of these biotech companies that I don't quite know the name of, but I always hear that they're moving into SLU.
Right. Well, speaking of SLU, we're gonna talk more about South Lake Union and our local companies a little bit later on the show. Before we take our little break, one more health note, Joanne, is that I hadn't known about this really. There's a survey of American health and it moves around the country. So the fact that King County is now participating, that's a new thing.
Yeah, it's been going on for decades, and this is called the NHANES study. It's a health and nutrition study of Americans, and they look at 5,000, I think, a year, and they get people. They look at their height, weight, health, chronic diseases. If people are agreeable, they'll take a blood sample. They'll see what's in their blood. How are they doing nutrition-wise? And so many important things have come out of this study. And the reason I think it's important to talk about is because they're calling some Seattle homes to say, do you want to take part in the study? And I know there's sort of an anti-government feeling all over, and you might want to say no, but boy, this is a great study. It's always been confidential. And I'll tell you some of the things that they've learned from the study in the past. One was how prevalent lead poisoning is, or too high levels of lead was. And they were able to monitor and see those lead levels come down over the years. How else are you going to know how big a problem is? This study is used widely in terms of health policy. What do we need to spend more money on? What are the problems in maternal and child health? And the data are used, and the analyses are used that they'll look at, what are the nutrients in our blood like? And do we need to fortify bread more than we do? All these big questions.
It's a CDC study, right?
It's a CDC study, but it's just giving clues on how to move forward in public health in terms of messaging. The lead message, that was a success that they point to. And all the cholesterol messaging came from the numbers, came from understanding where we were. So if they come to your door and you think about it, there's never been a problem with, the data don't get out. It's not individualized to you. If you go through with the full study, you get a free health exam, and they'll tell you how you're doing.
Oh,
it's
okay.
The data are really important in telling us the health of the country. And my fear is that people are going to say, nah, but I think it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, Joanne. I think, as you said, one of the big perks, in addition to contributing to, hopefully some more healthier programs in the US, but also just this free health and nutrition evaluation is huge, I think. And I think King County was also chosen one of 15 counties in the US. It's not a super huge thing every year, but I think it's maybe 5,000 people. But even still, one of 15 counties is really exciting. And the fact that we were chosen as one of them, I think could, only be good for our city and our county. So hopefully people do participate if they're asked.
Well, I realize this must be expensive to do it every place, but I'm a little disturbed that it's just that it's just 15 counties, when I would think that health issues are very different from place to place. And you hope that somebody's not getting missed who's could surface one of these important health concerns.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch that the statistical and epidemiological evaluations have gone very sophisticated. So they try to oversample certain groups because they haven't had big numbers in the past, or they recognize that they need big numbers that they might not be seeing. They go to 15 places around the country. It's a very sophisticated statistical analysis, and they're concerned about the same thing you are.
Okay, so finally, is this something I can volunteer for?
No.
How does it work?
They call
But okay, so here's my number.
CDC.
Okay, so you just may or may not get a phone call from
Right.
the Centers for Disease Control.
Right.
Okay. Well, thanks for telling us about that. We are going to take a short break. We have a couple of health reporters with us, so I'm just milking for all the information I can learn while we have Joanne Silberner and Elise Takahama here. And in a moment, we're going to turn the spotlight to Alex Halverson from Puget Sound Business Journal, because we're going to talk about Amazon layoffs, not 10,000, but almost double that. That's significant. And I want to learn about that and what it means for the Puget Sound area after we take a little break. We'll also smile for one reason or another when we come back.
I'm Julian Marshall, host of BBC NewsHour. On today's program, we'll speak to a Russian deserter as President Putin's unilateral ceasefire in Ukraine fails to materialize, and the bloody consequences in Mexico of the government taking on the Sinaloa drugs cartel.
BBC NewsHour begins this afternoon at 1, right after Week in Review on 94.9 KUOW. And be with us even later this afternoon for All Things Considered, which starts at 3 p.m. Here's a preview.
With endless news updates coming at you constantly, where do you even start? How about with segments that go deeper into the news you've been skimming all day and stories you want to hear because they're important, relevant, or just fun? Overwhelmed? Start here with All Things Considered from NPR. Listen every afternoon.
Support for KUOW comes from Reframe Career and Leadership, helping mid-level professionals and women leaders find purpose in their career by creating a path forward. Coaching workshops available now. More at reframecareer.com.
It's KUOW's Week in Review. You can watch the show on YouTube or Facebook because we're streaming it. Just search KUOW Public Radio. Or you could just sit back and listen to me, Bill Radke, and we have the Seattle Times Elise Takahama here, Puget Sound Business Journal's Alex Halverson, and independent journalist Joanne Silberner, breaking down the big news of the week. And I would count this, Alex. Amazon had said in the fall that it was going to cut approximately 10,000 positions, which is a lot. But now they're saying it turns out that number is more like 18,000, according to a company memo this week. Why the significant ramp up in layoffs from Amazon?
I mean, I don't know if we'll ever know why. They're good at keeping these things kind of secret. Could just be worsening economic conditions for them. Could be that their fourth quarter isn't going to be as good as they thought it might have been. But yeah, it's a big jump. Back in November when they said it, when we had all confirmed with them, they said it's going to be about 10,000, maybe more, maybe less. And then this week, it looked like it had gotten leaked. And so CEO Andy Jassy came out to employees and said, hey, by January 18th, those who will have been affected will be let know. And then combined with the November and January layoffs, it'll bump up to 18,000.
Okay. So I think, first of all, do we have any idea how many of these 18,000 layoffs will be in the Puget Sound area? Because Amazon's got a lot of people in a lot of places.
They do. We do not. I'm hopeful that on January 18th, if it's big enough, it affects one site, we'll get a warn notice, maybe from the Employment Security Department, the ESD. We'll let you know. I can't remember, but that will be.
I've unfortunately dealt with them.
Right. Yeah. That'll be our best insight. As I doubt Amazon will break it down by hub, by city, by any of that. But there's a good bet that it'll affect the Puget Sound region a lot. Yeah, they have hubs in New York and LA,
HQ2 in Virginia,
Nashville, every place, but they've got most of them here. I mean, over 60,000 corporate and tech employees here, and it's going to be affecting the retail side, the operations employees, the devices employees, mostly human resources. And that's a lot of what's in Seattle and Bellevue.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Elise and Joanne might have questions too, but one that popped to mind is, do you think for Puget Sound cuts, do you think Amazon will cut jobs in the Seattle offices and not the Bellevue offices because of the Seattle payroll tax?
I don't know, and I don't think so. I think the way they were structuring their move to Bellevue, this will affect Bellevue. A lot of the Bellevue early reporting, especially in the Seattle Times, it was reported that Bellevue is going to get a lot of the retail side, the Amazon.com, not a lot of the AWS, their cloud division. Well, these layoffs are affecting a lot of that retail side. Now, who knows what they'll be doing? Maybe they'll shift it to Bellevue, but I think this is going to hurt the Bellevue employment. The plan to get to, what was it, 25,000 over there? I think it's going to hurt that a lot.
And you were telling me part of the, sorry, just to, on that topic of Bellevue, that Bellevue is in a worse position in a way because Amazon doesn't own those buildings.
They don't own those buildings. I think maybe they had one project that they own, but it was a lot of that they were involved with the development, but they had leased those buildings. Where in Seattle, a lot of the newer development from Amazon is Amazon-owned stuff, right? So they're paying rent in Bellevue. And these are towers that aren't set to come online until, later this year, 2024, 2025. A lot of those projects have been paused over the summer. We reported that 5 towers were going to be paused. 1 wasn't even going to be built yet. So they're clearly thinking of like, okay, how do we get into Bellevue smoothly, especially now that we're going to be cutting people and eliminating roles. And the hiring has gone down. About a year ago, they had over 3,500 open roles in Bellevue. I think Wednesday when we reported on the layoffs, they had about 40.
Wow.
So the hiring prospects aren't even high over there right now.
Alex, I lived in New Jersey when Bell Labs was the premier telecommunications research institute in the country. And they just it was that. And they had, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 places around New Jersey. And they shut them one by one in the 80s. And it was suddenly in my little town, the taxi drivers would give you lectures on lasers, this was a place that had 9 Nobel Prizes. And all of a sudden if you went to the diner, the waiters were just incredibly smart. And you're thinking, where are these people going to go now?
Well, what's interesting is actually Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella said this in a recent, I think it was a conference or something. And you can look at occupational data and see this, that while the tech industry may be suffering a little bit, tech jobs are actually growing. Industries that were kind of slow to get to the digital revolution. Well, now those former Amazon employees, those former Salesforce employees, the ones with all these really big skill sets are able to sort of beef up the digital transformations of these companies. You're going to get
maybe finally our mobile website won't be terrible.
Maybe, you're going to maybe see some digital infusion into city governments that have some more cash on fund, or
they can go to Southwest.
They can go to, they will need them, right?
Please.
Yeah. But, it's like, I go on LinkedIn a lot to like reach out to employees who have been affected. And I saw one person, they had Microsoft, Amazon, Salesforce in their resume, and they recently got a job at Taco Bell, and they're a software development engineer at Taco Bell now. Right? That's just an example of that, right? That tech jobs aren't going anywhere. Some these employees probably aren't going anywhere, but they're not going to be working for the Amazons. But
are they going to be pushing people out? That was one thing I didn't notice in New Jersey, and I don't know whether it'll happen here, that where these jobs they were taking were pushing other people out.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be a different dynamic, right? I think that these are newer tech jobs. I don't think they're going to be driving taxis or being waiters. I think they're going to be probably working from home and for a company that's based in, I don't know, Chicago or wherever.
Mm-hmm.
Even in healthcare now, I think there are more and more tech jobs that are becoming available, which, I think a lot of people have different perspectives on, but it's one of those things that, even Amazon, I'm sure Alex, all of what they've been doing to try to acquire healthcare organizations and to try to get into that space has been really interesting to watch. And I think we'll probably continue to look into that this year. It's just, if they're not going to these other, Amazon types, then maybe going into different industries that are also kind of branching into healthcare might be an option too.
Yeah, telehealth is going to need a lot of technology people.
Absolutely. And a lot of these companies that are being affected by layoffs, they're public companies, right? They're still making more money than ever. Profitability is going down a little bit, but investors are kind of freaking out over slow growth, right? So some of these laid off employees, well, they're going to go to the private companies, right? That don't have as much investor pressure, that we might see a resurgence in like startups or something. I know I have a colleague who reports on startups and mid-sized companies, and kind of what you're hearing is this could be a kind of a new age for startups. That person who was at Amazon for a decade and had that great idea, well, now that they're laid off, they can bring that to a startup, or, that's just an example.
I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. Where job one is not to pump up earnings for the next call.
Exactly.
But what else could we, and as Elise said, Amazon certainly thinks that the healthcare sector needs, disrupting and building out. So we could be at the very beginning of all kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Which we are. At least one more question I got, and I keep the floor open, but is, of course, the economy. Local, like, people listening to us who aren't in that sector might be thinking, am I going to be able to afford a home, or am I going to be, I'm a South Lake Union business, that's awfully specific, but a lot of people could be affected by this positively or negatively.
Yeah, I'm not a residential real estate expert, but there has been some great reporting. I know I read something in the Times a few weeks ago that, while the housing market is kind of cooling down, not affordable. And I don't think these tech layoffs will make a huge difference in affordability, because the employees, there's no sign that they're going anywhere. Yeah, they're laid off by Amazon, but now they can work remotely for Shopify or wherever. Yeah. Right. So they're still, and they've got great severance packages at a lot of these companies. So, they could be able to live off that. A lot of their compensation was wrapped up into stock units. So they've got sort of that base that they maybe can live on in between jobs. So are you going to see a glut of affordable housing? I doubt it. The South Lake Union economy thing is interesting because, they were hit pretty hard by the pandemic. All those people were working from home in that area, and a lot of retail tenants, food, traditional retail, moved into that place because they thought they were going to be served by tens of thousands tech employees with a bunch of cash in their pocket every day. I remember last year I talked to Rachel from Rachel's Ginger Beer, who moved into the base of an Amazon tower. And she said, yeah, Amazon's actually a good landlord and I like the location. But when I moved in, I had the idea that I was going to have so many people coming to my shop every day. And it hasn't been that way, obviously. So I think you're going to see a continuation of that with less people working at these places.
Okay, well, we have a few minutes left, about 10 minutes left in the show, and a lot to smile about, if you think about it. We just don't always know it. So let's talk about what has made us smile this week. And Elise, a colleague of yours at the Seattle Times, wrote about New Year's resolutions that don't make you feel worse. And you were telling me that's something to smile about.
Yeah, my colleague Hannah Furfaro, she's on the mental health lab, and she wrote about attainable New Year's resolutions, which is a fun read. And I think it's important for people to keep in mind, honestly. I think, this time of year, we all kind of aim for the stars, which is good. But then, February, you feel awful about yourself. So, any way to kind of prevent that and, make yourself feel good through once January ends, I think is important. So that's a good one for people to keep in mind. It doesn't have to be some whole new fitness routine. It can be something much more easier to incorporate into your daily life.
And my attitude on timing is the same as my attitude on if I ever win the lottery. It's like, you don't spend it right away. My attitude on New Year's resolutions is not January 1st, but January 6th.
Oh,
that's a great idea.
It is the day of going out and doing great things.
Well,
your colleague wrote about, here's, instead of just eat less, there's be self-compassionate, practice self-compassion, express myself creatively, find peace in my environment. And Elise, I can still find ways to feel bad about not doing enough of all of those. I didn't find as much peace in my environment as I said I was going to, but one I really related to on the list was building community, because I have given up making resolutions that are solitary, because if I was going to do it, I'd already be doing it personally. But building community, if you perhaps on January 6th, if you will go and reach out to somebody and put yourself out there and maybe even sign up for something, promise to do something, bring something to the potluck, exchange phone numbers, offer up your home for that book club that you've resolved to participate in. If you build those ties and sort of obligate yourself to something. We are social animals. We might not, I'm kind of introverted. I might not want to do it, but I'm more likely to do it if I get the ball rolling. And hey, it turns out that, Elise is kind of nice to spend time around. Maybe I'll stay in that book club, etc.
Yeah, definitely. I think especially after starting to come out of those pandemic norms and routines and being really isolated, that's something that I've had a really hard time with getting back into. So yeah, that's a good one, building community.
Yeah. Anything else making you smile this week, team?
Well, I've gone to my dog before and I'll go to her again. We found a great place for her for overnight visits. And I heard a phrase that dogs exist to show us that everything's exciting.
Everything is exciting. Yeah. True. Yeah, we dog sat over the holidays. I haven't had a dog since I was, 15 years old or something. And it's kind of fun. I thought it was going to be a yappy, annoying little thing, and sort of bonded with that dog. I was considering stealing it. Alex, how about you?
Yeah, we talked about it off mic a lot, and I know the house is pure chaos and maybe worrying by the second, but the jokes and the memes have just been making me smile.
The house.
Oh,
And it has been fun.
oh my gosh.
In a horrible way, it's been fun.
I've got a couple of them. Remember Krampus Gate?
Vaguely.
Okay, so these are Germany and Austria have this very old, centuries old holiday tradition of a Christmas demon who scares misbehaving children. So it's this horned, half goat, half human creature. Genuinely creepy. I don't think I go through Halloween thinking it's not spooky, it's not scary, stop saying spooky. But actually, the Krampus costumes are legit. I think they're real animal horns too. But anyway, they're pretty creepy.
This isn't a Bill Murray movie.
no,
Okay.
but it's set in a sort of Punxsutawney type of town because in Leavenworth for the last couple of Christmases they had Leavenworth, the Bavarian themed tourist town. It's supposed to be a friendly, happy place, but they let the Krampus revelers. Christmas is a big deal at Leavenworth, and there were so many complaints. I don't know how many complaints. There's actually an argument about whether this was a few disgruntled people or masses of terrified tots. But it was enough that the Leavenworth leaders said they shut it down, right? No, we're not going to do Krampus. So here over these holidays that just passed comes Bremerton and says, come on down, you can haunt us. And there was a Krampusnacht event in downtown Bremerton. And I was reading about it. There are places who welcome in them. The Krampus do haunted houses, like in Mount Lake Terrace, and they did a liquor release party at a Chuckanut Bay distillery in Bellingham.
But what does that mean, liquor release? A new type of...
A new scotch or something. Yeah. And maybe horn flavored. I don't know all the details. But, Chris Kringle Market in Tacoma. And the reason this made me smile is I feel that, Halloween is scary fun, supposedly anyway. Kids are going to cry on Santa's lap anyway. So I kind of liked to see... it's great if Leavenworth wants to be child friendly in Strassenhauserhofen. That's great, but I kind of appreciated that Bremerton stepped up and said, "Scare us."
So you're going to go there next year?
I might just go to Bremerton just to see the Krampus and cry. And then finally, my second smile is that the Scrabble dictionary added a word that I had never heard of. I can't believe I hadn't heard of it. Do any of you know what an eggcorn is?
An eggcorn?
Eggcorn. Thank you for asking. It will use up all your Scrabble tiles if you plural it. Eggcorn is EGGCORN. And it's because apparently some people think that an oak tree drops acorns. Yeah, you're looking surprised, Alex. Your mouth just flew open. Which is, it's acorn, but it's understandable because an acorn is a seed. Look, it's kind of like a corn kernel. Seeds are kind of like eggs. The acorn's sort of egg shaped. So eggcorn is an understandably misunderstood word or phrase that still kind of makes sense. For example, if you say cold slaw and always thought it was cold slaw,
yeah.
You're not total. I mean, it is a cold slaw. You're not dead wrong.
I think you're being generous with understandable. Maybe.
Well, I'm an understanding person, Alex. But some other possible acorns, and maybe you all have grown up with your own. But to say that something spread like wildflowers,
Oh, that's nice.
So, like, if you think wildflowers spread quickly, then that would make sense to you. It's
Or
not,
maybe it means spread slowly, but in a positive way.
yeah, maybe something spread like wildflowers. Isn't that kind of
nice
nice?
and slow.
If COVID is going to
Beautifully.
spread, I'd rather it spread like wildflowers than wildfire. Something, if you think something can be coming down the pipe instead of down the pike, I don't even know what a pike is, honestly. So things do come down a pipe.
It's turnpike. It was down the road.
Oh, is that? Oh, down the turnpike. Okay, so a pipe
But I like
doesn't
down
have
the
a
pipe.
toll to it, and so I was thinking, Alex, of you, that a Seattle eggcorn could be to say that Amazon coming to the Puget Sound area was, and many people say this, was a boom to the economy. Right?
No, that's a good one.
It's supposed to be a boom,
Yeah,
but
that's
but-
a good one.
yeah, but this year Amazon might be a
Mhm.
boom to the economy. So, last rights, you might feel you have rights at the end of your life, instead of
Yeah,
RITES.
that's
So
good.
it's relatable, right? So now you know a new
There we go.
word and you get credit for it in Scrabble. And that made me smile. Is that wrong?
No, that's great.
No, I think it should be a regular part of the program where people get to nominate. Because I know I'm going to go home and think of 10 of them, but I can't think of any right now.
All right, well, enjoy that. Good. I've given you something to do on your way home. That's Joanne Silberner, an independent health journalist, and Seattle Times health reporter Elise Takahama, and Puget Sound Business Journal tech reporter Alex Halverson. And they've all helped you understand, assuming that you've been doing other things besides following Kevin McCarthy breathlessly and keeping up on the news. We do it all for you in an hour. And I just love to see you. Thank you all for being on our show today.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks.
Elise, I want to see you in person someday in our studio soon.
Definitely. I'll be there next time. Thanks,
Okay,
Bill.
Thanks, everybody. Week in Review is produced by Kevin Kniestedt, whom I also thank. And we get social media and live streaming support from Juan Pablo Chiquiza and Tio Popescu. And Bernard Wallet runs the board, thanklessly or not. Whether I thank him or not, he's there making the show sound great. And I thank you for listening. And I thank you for joining us a week from today when we come back with more Week in Review.
Take it over that.
Eggcorn. It should take you a minute. I had never heard of it. I actually think, I don't know if there are arguments in the Scrabble dictionary world, but eggcorn seems a bit of a stretch to me to make it
Fridays.
a word. But yeah.